Hi, this is James Lawrence, and this is another episode of Erie Street Stories. This week, we're going to go to a small town where your average kid, Chuck, who lives next door to the prettiest girl in school, has to make a decision whether or not to let her in the house when she shows up some strange and dark night. So let's sit back, enjoy the show, invite a friend over, and here we go with Something About Riley on Erie Street Stories. Something About Riley. Chuck Green knew three things for sure. He hated running the mile in gym class. He loved anything with extra cheese. And he had been in love with Riley Rhodes since the moving truck rumbled away from her driveway 10 summers ago. He remembered that afternoon so clearly it could have been laminated in his brain. Riley, age 7, standing on the curb with a box labeled books hugged to her chest. Cute red hair and pretty blue eyes. She had looked at him and said, "Hi, neighbor." And Chuck, chubby, cautious, perpetually flushed, had dropped his own box of Hot Wheels and said nothing at all. Now they were sophomores at Northridge High. Riley was the prettiest girl in school by unanimous vote, the sort of flawless beauty that didn't seem fair. Captain of JV cheer, good at algebra, the person whose laughter made even the fluorescent lights in the hallway feel warmer. Chuck was good at letting doors close quietly and finishing French fries. He was also, for better or worse, a kid who told the truth to exactly one person, Donnie Turner. Donnie was tall and skinny. Acne crowded his cheeks with constellations. He kept a spiral notebook full of lists. Movies to watch, conspiracy theories to test, jokes to try out at lunch. And if you sat by Donnie for longer than 30 seconds, he was going to show you something circled in red ink. Right after the last bell that Tuesday, under the sagging banner advertising homecoming, Chuck blurted that he was completely, irreversibly in love with Riley Rhodes. "Dude," Donnie said, as if he'd been expecting it for a while and was glad to finally have written it down. "No way! She's out of your league." "I know she's Riley," Chuck said, trying not to let his voice squeak. "But we've lived next door since forever. Sometimes we watch the same movie through our windows." "That's not watching a movie together," Donnie laughed. "That's two separate viewings with a row of hedges in between." He flipped to a different page of his notebook. "Anyway, I've got some more pressing news. Another kid went missing." Chuck's stomach dropped. "Another? Who?" "Not sure yet. Somebody from Southridge. Cops are starting to think there may be a serial killer. Like for real." Donnie's eyes gleamed with an awful thrill of repeating something he shouldn't be repeating. "Radio said they're advising people not to walk alone at night." "That's horrible," Chuck said. He pictured a shadowy figure, a white panel van, all the things grown-ups said were urban legends until they weren't. But then the hallway filled with the color of Riley's hair as she turned the corner, her friends orbiting her like satellites. She caught him looking. She had to, because Chuck had been staring, and for a bleach-bright second, she just stood there, eyes on his, as if to place him. Then she rolled her eyes and departed with her two laughing girlfriends, perfume trailing after her like a ribbon. Donnie craned his neck to watch. "See? Different leagues. It's like baseball versus the moon." "Shut up," Chuck muttered. But his cheeks were burning. He tried to tell himself that eye-rolling didn't mean anything. Maybe she had an eyelash stuck. Maybe she had intended to wink and miscalculated. Maybe. That night, the house was quiet in a way that made Chuck aware of each separate creak. The refrigerator's steady trum, the clock ticking. He did his math, text Donnie and memes until Donnie fell asleep without warning. "I'm an old soul," Donnie always said, and finally drifted off with his headphones on. He woke to a sound that cut clean through the dredge of sleep. A scream. It was brief and ragged as torn paper, and it came from outside. Chuck sat up, heart thudding. The glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling flickered with his breath. The scream didn't repeat. For a few seconds, he convinced himself it must have come from the movie he'd fallen asleep to. Except his earbuds were in his hand, not in his ears. The house was just his and the dark. He slid out of bed and crept to the window. Next door, the Rhodes' house looked ordinary and quiet. Riley's bedroom window glowed a soft yellow. Chuck stared at it precisely the way he always did, wanting something he didn't know how to name. As he watched, the light went out. Not a dimmer, not a slow fade, but it just clicked off, like a lid snapping shut. The square of glass was black. Every hair on his forearms rose. He stood there a long time, waiting for some kind of explanation that never came. He knew he should do something. He always knew that every movie where a character does something, at midnight he ends up in a body bag. So he went back to bed, pulling the covers up to his chin like that could convince the night to leave him alone. By morning, he'd convinced himself it had been a cat, or a fox, or a dream that had escaped into waking. He met outside the school. "Did you hear?" Donnie asked, looking jittery. "Riley Rhodes is missing." The words fell out of the air like a trapdoor opening. "Missing? What? No. Cops were at her house before I rode up on my bike," Donnie said. "They're checking the creek. Everyone's freaking out, and that's not all." He tugged his notebook free and didn't even look down at it. He'd memorized this. "They found one of the other kids, Greg Jones." Greg Jones? The senior? The wide receiver? Greg had the kind of quarterback smile that got put on banners, the type of chest that made letter jackets look like magazine covers. "Yeah, found him in an old equipment shed behind the baseball diamond." Donnie's voice lowered, as if he were narrating something late night and forbidden. "And it wasn't a serial killer. I mean, it was a serial something, but get this, vampire." Despite the ache spreading through his chest like a bruise, Chuck snorted. "Come on." "I'm serious," Donnie said. "Greg's throat was eaten out. Not cut. Eaten. And he was drained of blood." "You read that on a subreddit." "I heard it from my cousin who works with a guy who knows the groundskeeper," Donnie said, which was South Ridge science for fact. "And it makes sense, right? There are rules. They can't get you if you're inside your house. They can only enter if they're invited. That's why vampires always do that weird polite thing at doors in old movies." "You need to stop mainlining monster marathons," Chuck said, but his voice wavered. Somewhere below sarcasm, a painful thought pushed up like a nail through carpet. The scream, the square of light going dark, the knowledge that Riley was missing and that he had stood there and done nothing. "Anyway," Donnie said, watching him, "you okay?" Chuck lied with a nod. In English, the teacher tried to keep the class busy by making them write descriptive paragraphs, and Chuck's pen sprawled out words he didn't want, accidentally too honest. Blue eyes, a ponytail, a laugh that made geometry easy. He crumpled the page and started again, this time about the smell of rain. The day stretched thin and strange. Police cars idled in the lot. The principal made an announcement about safety, community, and counselors. By the time the final bell rang, that purple bruise inside Chuck had deepened into something worse. Guilt had a taste. It was copper. His parents had a charity dinner in the city that night, the kind of event where his mother wore the pearls that came out only for weddings and fundraisers. "Pizza money on the counter," his dad said, already half in his sports coat. "Lock up after the delivery guy leaves, okay? No late night gaming." "Sure," Chuck said, not mentioning the idea of video games, of anything loud and bright, made his skin feel too thin. He ate 2 slices and then put the box in the fridge. The house grew very large around him. Every sound was bigger, alone, the ice maker rattling, the neighbor's garage door, a dog 2 streets over. He tried to read, then not to think, then to think deliberately. The rational explanation is that Riley ran away to punish her mom for not letting her go to homecoming with that college guy or something. The knock at the door didn't sound like it belonged to a rational explanation. It was careful, spaced knocks, polite like the rhythm adults use when they don't want to scare you. Every sound startled him, but this one lifted the small hairs along the back of his neck. He stood. The hallway seemed longer than he remembered. He peered through the peephole. Riley Rhodes stood on the porch. For a second, relief moved through him so fast it hurt. He pressed his palm against the door, feeling the cheap wood and the thud of his heart. Riley looked off. Her skin had the sick room paleness of someone who'd spent too long under fluorescent lights. Her smile was a little crooked and a little too fixed, like a sticker not quite pressed down. He opened the door exactly 2 inches on the chain. Riley? Hey, Chuck. Her voice was calm, warm enough to melt something inside him. I was out for a walk. I saw your light on. You were... People are looking for you, he blurted. They think you're missing. I know. I was homesick, Riley said quietly. Stomachache. It was the worst. She tilted her head, and for a second he remembered Riley from the hallway, from 100 summers of sprinkler arcs, and from laughing over the hedges. But I feel much better now. Chuck's gaze snagged on the red smear at the corner of her mouth. Lip gloss, he told himself. Cherry. The porch light made her eyes look darker than usual. You shouldn't be out, he said. It's not safe. I know. She stepped closer to the door, and he could smell her shampoo, apples, and something sharper beneath. Are your parents out for the night? He hesitated. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Donnie's voice started playing. They can only enter if they're invited. That's why they do that weird polite thing at doors. Maybe you can invite me in? Riley said. It sounded like a line she'd used before, practiced. We could talk. It's been a weird day. Chuck swallowed. We could talk on the porch. It's cold, she said. And I've always liked you, you know. I saw you looking at me the other day. I realized you like me too. The smile shifted, widening, showing just a little more tooth than he was used to seeing. I like you, Chuck. I always have. The words landed like a dream he'd had 1,000 times and never told anyone. It would have been so easy to pull the chain, to open the door, to step into the warm version of the night where the girl next door came over because she liked him back. But behind her words, something else breathed. He remembered the scream. He remembered her window going dark like a mouth closing. He remembered Greg Jones. Why weren't you in school, he asked, if you were just sick? Stomachache, she repeated a little too smoothly. But I feel much better. And the scream last night, he said. Was that you? Riley's eyes didn't move. No, she said. I didn't scream. He stood there with the hand on the chain, 2 inches of door dividing the world into before and after. What if she wasn't a vampire and he didn't invite her in? He would be the boy, shut the door on a girl who had needed help. What if she was, and he did? He would be a story whispered too late. I'm sorry, he said, and he meant it more than he'd meant anything. I can let you in. He closed the door. For a second, there was silence, and in the silence he heard his own breathing too loud. Then Riley's voice came from the other side, muffled, laughing, the edge of it wrong. Why won't you let me in, Chuck? Knuckles tapped the door in a playful rhythm. You don't think I'm a vampire, do you? Since she said the word, it was as if something clicked into place. A switchblade snapped open. He pressed his forehead to the door. Yes, he said, surprising himself with the steadiness of his voice. Yes, I do. You're smarter than I thought, she said, and there was a sliver of admiration in it that made him want to cry. Open the door, Chuck. Trust me. If I were a vampire, I couldn't get in anyway, right? Those are the rules, she giggled. Trust me, Chuck, I'm not a vampire. The line was so perfect, it would have been funny if Terror hadn't sat down beside him. He pictured Donnie's notebook, the red circles. He pictured Riley in homeroom, chewing her pencil. His hand moved without his permission, sliding the chain free. He opened the door. For a half breath, she stood there, with that too bright smile. Then her face changed. It wasn't dramatic like in movies where bones sprout from skin and with sounds like gravel. It wasn't even loud, but it was wrong. The slope of her jaw extended, teeth flattening into something wide and purposeful. Her eyes went the color of wet stone. Hair bristled along her arms in a dark rush. The skin at her temples rippled. Every part of her that had been merely pretty reordered itself into something that had nothing to do with prettiness and everything to do with hunger. Riley opened her mouth, and the smile wasn't a smile anymore. It was a muzzle. She lunged. Chuck's body did the only thing it knew how to do. It screamed. The sound tore out of him, raw and alive, a sound that remembered the scream from the night before and tried to outscream it. The thing that had been Riley slammed into the door, and both of them went crashing backward into the entryway. Her weight was enormous, her breath hot and rank with iron. Claws, or hands, or both. He saw her eyes, and in them, for a flicker, a girl stood at the curb with a box marked books and said, "Hi, neighbor." And then the flicker was gone, and the eyes were not human. "Riley," he managed, a word and a prayer and a memory. The werewolf, because there was no other word for what crouched over him under his porch light, threw back her head and screamed too. A sound like all the dogs on the block had been wired into a single throat. Somewhere in the distance a siren answered. Somewhere in his pocket his phone vibrated with a text he would never read. Donnie, probably, with a new theory, a new list. In the very real, very specific moment, Chuck felt the impact of his own heart against his ribs, the exact sensation of being both more terrified and more certain that he had ever been. He had been right. She wasn't a vampire. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode on Erie Street Stories. It was a little bit of a twist ending, and I don't know if you saw it coming or not, but either way, it was a lot of fun. So I hope you show up next week and watch another episode of Erie Street Stories. Again, bring some friends over and enjoy the show. Please tell your friends. Help by subscribing and spreading the word. So we'll see you next time on Erie Street Stories.